Today I want to talk about the challenge of an empty chair. You know, it's an interesting concept to think of an empty chair. And it could be viewed as a good thing or a bad thing. You know, if you have an empty chair because you have a cancellation or no-show, bad thing. If you have an empty chair on purpose, I heard a stat once, long time ago, that if you purposefully put an empty chair in a dental office, it'll generate like $250,000 in revenue a year, which might have you sitting there shaking your head going, what? I thought this empty chair was going to be a tongue lashing for no-show cancellations. Don't worry, that'll come next. Just kidding. But the power of an empty chair is, if you have a smaller office anyway, or even if you don't have a smaller office, the power of an empty chair is when you have an emergency, you have somewhere to put them. Even if you can't afford to fully equip it because you have your small practice, small budget, just a chair and a light, or a chair, a light, and an x-ray. And man, you can get one of those little handheld portable x-rays from Digital Doc, carry them all over, the cost is a whole lot less. So now all of a sudden you have an opportunity to do something completely different. So an empty chair allows you to sneak that emergency patient in that otherwise might get booked out a while. And it can have a huge impact on revenue. $250,000 is what the data I've seen says. So whether that's accurate or not, you know, here nor there, I'd be willing to bet if you put an empty chair in your operatory, it would become full. It's kind of like the if you build it, they will come thing from Field of Dreams, for those of you who have seen the movie. If you haven't, the reference is no fun. So there is power, positive power, in an empty chair. Now, however, if you have an empty chair because someone no-showed on you or canceled last minute, you have another issue. And the real issue relative to that is, how much is that costing you? What is the cost of that opportunity? Not only is there lost revenue, but maybe, let's assume it's a hygiene patient, so there's lost revenue from hygiene revenue, but in addition to that, there's lost diagnostic revenue to diagnose something for that patient, and now we have to effectively see that patient twice. And what I mean by that is we had a whole hour or two or whatever it is reserved for this patient. Now we have to reserve another whole hour or two for this patient. And if we can't recover that appointment today, this 1 hour appointment now took 2 hours for the same amount of revenue. So our hourly productivity just got cut in half. That's a challenge, a huge challenge, especially if you're trying to grow your productivity. Because one of the challenges I find a lot of people don't understand is what's the break even of the practice. And what I mean by that is how long does it take the practice to break even on a monthly basis? Said another way, it costs X amount of dollars to open the doors and have the practice open on a monthly basis. And let's assume it's $50,000 with salaries, rent, payments for the equipment, electricity, water, supplies, $50,000. So what that means is for the first $50,000 of production, and I said production on purpose because there's a difference between production and collection. For the first $50,000 in production, the office has made no money. All we have done is paid bills. So if you're ever wondering why the doctor might be going crazy the last week of the month, it's because that's the only week the doctor actually gets to make a paycheck themselves. Meaning, let's assume for round math, you work 16 days a month, 4 days a week, 4 weeks a month, and you have 75% overhead, just again for easy math. What that means is the first 12 days of the month are just to break even. The last 4 are when the doctor actually gets paid, or when you, as a team member, get a raise. If we can't get through those 4 days productively, no raises happen. Doctor doesn't even get paid. So if all of a sudden 3 weeks of the month is fine, and then the last week you live in Colorado, big snowstorm comes, we lose the whole week, holy cow, that's a bad month. And that's the whole point of the empty chair. It's the same thing on a smaller scale. So if you understand why a doctor could be losing their minds with an empty chair, especially in the last week of the month, and really it's the same for the whole thing, but the last week of the month is the only time they get paid. If those 4 days fall apart, the doctor doesn't make a paycheck. Now, the challenge with that is you might be assuming your doctor's rich, but if really, truly, your doctor did not make a paycheck that month, how are they supposed to pay their mortgage, their car payment, their schools, for their kids, their grocery bill, their living expenses? It's challenging. And I'm not saying this to guilt trip anyone. I'm just saying this to give us all pause. An empty chair is so expensive for a practice because not only did we lose that revenue potentially, if we reschedule them, then we didn't lose the revenue. And a lot of times when I have this conversation with people, like, well, we didn't lose the revenue. We got them scheduled next week. Well, that's true, but we just cut the productivity in half, meaning we doubled the overhead for this period of time. If we did that for the whole month, holy cow, our overhead just went from 75% to something outrageous that maybe we can't overcome. So mathematically, it is very, very important. It's very important for us to understand that an empty chair is a priority. And we should always have a plan in place for an empty chair. Meaning, if we have a crown cancel as an example, it would be so much better to put a crown back in there rather than an emergency filling. An emergency filling or a broken tooth is fine, but the challenge is if we're scheduling the goal, if we're scheduling the budget, the challenge is that that procedure will not match what was previously there in time or dollars. You know, you can see an emergency in, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 minutes, and you had an hour and a half blocked for the crown. So now what do you do with the rest of the time? So we kind of put it in the middle, and it doesn't end up using our time efficiently. So it would be better if we could put a procedure in there that fits the same time block. And even better if we can put a procedure in there that fits the same revenue block, because we might be scheduling the goal because we all want a raise, we all want a bonus, we all want a trip to Mexico, whatever it might be. So what I would do is always have a list of people. Who can I move up? Give you a hygiene example. What I would personally recommend you do is schedule your patients not 6 months out, but maybe 6 months and 3 weeks out. Because now if you have a no-show in your hygiene schedule and you know someone who's got a flexible life, you can look and go, okay, I know there's plus 3 weeks. So as long as I don't bring them in 3 weeks early, we're good. We're past the 6-month mark for insurance reasons. And I can call them up and say, hey, do you want to come in early? I have a hole today. Would this work for you? And you never know, it might work even better. So I would always schedule your patients 6 months plus 2-3 weeks. Don't go 7 or 8. It's not good for their health. But 6 months plus 2 or 3 weeks, so you can pull them in ahead. Same with your restorative patients. If you know the people who are flexible, you can call them and say, hey, Joe, can you come early for your crown? We just happen to have a hole in the schedule, and I was thinking about you, and I was thinking maybe you'd like to get that done sooner. So do you have time later today? You never know. Maybe the answer will be yes. The answer is always no until you ask. So I would always be thinking about that. And depending on the software you have, some of the softwares give you the ability to search very, very specific criteria that you can search for. As an example, who has had a root canal but has not come back for the prescribed crown? Every time I run that in an office, there's usually 40 or 50 patients who slip through the cracks. And then if I put the criteria on top of it, if I only want people who have remaining insurance benefits of, say, $500, now I have a highly qualified person because they already spent the money on the root canal. They already know they need a crown, but they forgot, and they have remaining insurance benefits. Now, how powerful would that list be if you have a crown no-show today? Probably pretty powerful. I would think it would be. So depending on your software you have, I can't obviously address any particular softwares because I have no idea who's watching this, but some of the softwares are very, very good at searching criteria that specific to where you can do it. Another idea, what if you hit Facebook? Hey guys, we have an opening in the coveted 4 o'clock tomorrow. Put it out on Facebook and say, hey, first come, first serve, whoever gets here gets that appointment. I know everybody loves this. You would be shocked if you have a good social media following, how many people show up and show up quickly for that appointment. So you can use various avenues to solve these problems. So have a list of people that you know are flexible. Have a list of people or a searchable method to find people who have similar criteria. Schedule your patients out far enough relative to hygiene to where you can pull them up. Use social media. There's a million things you can do. And if we're effective at recovering this lost time, that's where raises happen. You know, I loved how someone put it recently, just last night actually. This person was texting me saying, you know, gold diggers, using the metaphor of gold diggers, not gold diggers. The metaphor was gold diggers never give up because they know if they're going to keep searching, they will eventually find it. They're a very tenacious group of people. My question to you is, are you tenacious when there's a hole in the schedule? Do you go digging for gold for your practice? Because if you do want a raise, if you do want better health care, if you want benefits in your practice, start digging for gold. And if you can't find gold, start digging for silver. Because it turns out it's worth as much as gold almost lately. So we have to be tenacious. We have to be willing to work hard to find these solutions. And if we understand the overhead of the business and we understand the cost of an empty chair and we can recover it, it does wonderful, wonderful things for the practice. I saw one practice fairly recently that was very effective at keeping the schedule full. And they were like $100,000 over what they had normally been. And all they had to do was recover those empty slots. And it yielded, in this case, I mean, it's a bigger practice, of course, but it yielded an additional $100,000. You could be a single doc practice, and this could yield you another $10,000 or $15,000. And if you don't believe me, look back at last month. Figure out how many hours of doctor time you had empty, how many hours of hygiene time you had empty. Figure out what your hourly average is for those two different departments and calculate it. It might make you sick to your stomach. If you want leverage for yourself, there's your homework. Go back to last month, print out the schedule, figure out how many minutes or hours, units maybe is a better way to do it, units of time that you had empty at those two different rates. Figure out your hourly rate in those two departments, multiply it out, and see how much, had we kept the schedule full, your practice could have done. And then ask yourself, if we keep that extra revenue, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, maybe as high as $100,000, depending on the size of your practice, ask yourself if you could get a raise, if you were a part of the solution to this problem. If you're sitting back on, I don't really care, I have no urgency, don't be asking for a raise. But if you are part of the solution and you're hustling and filling that, find me a doctor who won't give you a raise. I don't think they exist. At least certainly not in my audience. I'm certain every doctor in my audience would gladly give raises, bonuses, whatever it might be if we can perform like that. So the opportunity is yours. I would sit down, if you want leverage on yourself, do the math, figure out how much economic loss there is in your business. And remember that that does not count the appointments you recovered because you rescheduled that patient and you cut your hourly in half. That's a whole other piece of pain that we're missing that we really can't tell. I mean, you could if you have a good memory, you go back and look, but that's probably not worth the work. It's interesting to see what the cost of an empty chair is in this context. It's also interesting to see if your chairs are always full and you never have a hole, what the value of an empty chair is if you put one in. Food for thought. Hope you enjoyed the show. Can't wait to see you next week, 8 o'clock Mountain, 10 o'clock on the East Coast. Until then, have an awesome week.
What if you could have the practice of your dreams? What's holding you back? Imagine a life where you have everything you ever wanted.